Good morning, everybody. How we doing? Good. That was a good song for this first three chapters, that last one. It's almost like he knew what he was doing. All right. Well, you got your books? Because it is book club. Last Sunday of the month is book club. And what a great book, right? Seeking the Face of God. We could do nothing better with our time than trying to do that. So there's the book. Whoop, I went too far there. Dr. David Martin Lloyd Jones. When you're this important, you get multiple names. But just real brief, in case those of you that don't know, he was born December 20th of 1899 in Cardiff, Wales. And he died in March 1st of 1981 in London. He was actually a doctor. He trained to be a doctor, went to the University of London, and then got out and spent a couple of years doctoring and working his way up, and then felt his call to ministry and changed. He served in the Westminster Chapel there in London for whatever that is, 29 years, and then did a lot of other things. I just could only put a few things on there, but for a while he was served as the president of the InterVarsity Fellowship of Students. Of course, he's an expository preacher, goes verse by verse, what we're meaning by that. He was a co-founder of Banner of Truth Publishing, if you know that publisher, and his work continues to be published. In what we're doing now, these are sermons that he's done back from the 1950s. And so it's helpful sometimes for context what he was preaching about at that time. You know, we're coming off of the Second World War. I mean, granted, it had been a few years, but there was definitely a sense of what's going on in the world. We've just come off our Second World War. In living memory for many people at that time, 2 major world wars, lots of people dying through that. So a lot of people questioning, a lot of people saying, who is God? Where is God? Things like that. Is there a God? So you can kind of get some sense of what he was doing in his first couple here as we were reading in chapters 1 and chapters 2. So without further ado, let's dig into that. We're going to give just a brief synopsis of those chapters as we look at this, and then as we get through, and then we're going to leave you with some study questions there at the back of your worksheet that you guys get to talk about at your table. Try and bring that a little more into the present day. So let's jump into that. Chapter 1, the folly of unbelief. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. That's from Psalm chapter 14. That's the very first verse of that. This really becomes a question about our relationship with God, right? Again, no matter what happens, right? They're coming off world wars and other things, but hey, we've seen a lot of the same things, right? We're coming off, no matter what happens in the world wars and riots and pandemics, but none of that is more important than the question, what is your relationship with God? Do you have one? Do you believe in a God? In fact, these tragedies, they really bring that question to the forefront for a lot of us. You saw people, we go through a lot of things right now. COVID, people died and got really sick. And that is going to, as you ponder your existence, it's going to bring that question for some right to the forefront. And that's where he's at with that. The idea here is anyone who says there is no God is just a fool, right? Versus, as we see in the Psalms and in the Proverbs, right? The wise person is a person of understanding, a person of wisdom, right? The fool, he's a superficial person. He's not one that thinks well, he lacks the ability to think clearly. He acts impetuously. In other words, he doesn't consider the consequences of his actions. Acts in an idiotic manner. He's lacking in reason and insight.
All humans.
So that's the definition of the fool. there's three reasons that he goes through why they're fools, and I related a few of those back to some other things, but they're governed by what they want to do. You see that in Romans 1, all of chapter 1, that's what they're doing. They're doing what they want to do. They go against their conscience. We see that in Romans chapter 2. And they do not act on their understanding but their desires. Kind of almost a summation of both of those two in a sense. But those are the three reasons that Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones gives us there for why they're fools. And then he's dealing with objections in that first chapter. And he goes through two of them, and then he has a couple of responses in each of those. But the first objection that he was encountering, that he gives to us, is we don't believe in God because we lack understanding. That's not true, actually. It's the opposite. We don't believe in God because we have understanding. All of our great learning has allowed us to understand that there is no God. Well, Lloyd-Jones's response to that is, then every learned person it wouldn't believe in God, and every uneducated person would believe in God. Yet we find people in both camps today, whether they're learned or not. There's people who believe in God and don't believe in God in both ways. But they don't act on their understanding, right? They are acting on their desires. And so that's his response to that first objection. This is nothing new, right? This is David writing back in BC 1000-ish, and we've got the same problem today. He was addressing then. Okay, here's some stupid people that really that believed in God. Blaise Pascal, very smart man, right? He says, if I believe in God and life after death, and you do not, and if there is no God, we both lose when we die. However, if there is a God, you still lose and I gain everything. You guys have heard of Pascal's wager? That's what that is right there. And essentially that's where Lloyd-Jones is going to get at the end of this, but there's a good one. And then you can see Pascal's another quote from there, is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man, which cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God, the Creator made known through Jesus. Here's another dumb guy, Isaac Newton, who believed in God. He who thinks half-heartedly will not believe in God, but he who really thinks has to believe in God. I mean, there's a great summation of what we're talking about, the fool and the wise man, right? Doesn't think half-heartedly, doesn't think deeply about these things. And you can see there's another quote by him there as well. And there's another dumb guy, Albert Einstein. The more I study science, the more I believe in God. So just so we can show some people through the centuries there that have been really smart and have believed in God. Objection number 2, all our recent knowledge, Darwin, psychology, comparative religions is what he brings up. They drive us to say there is no God. That's the objection. He responds, there is nothing new about denying God. Again, when David wrote the psalm, people of his time were denying God. Book knowledge is not the same as understanding. These are just more excuses. That's my paraphrase there at the end in the parentheses. But they're more excuses. They just want to do what they want to do, but they couch it in this new knowledge. But it's really not new. It's just something new to hang their hat on that's no different than people were doing over time. He responds again about this recent knowledge. They arrive at these momentous conclusions on insufficient evidence. So they'll make a statement about, he brings up the problem of evil as one thing that he kind of goes on. They'll say, how would God allow, these bad things to happen? Surely there can't be a God. And but they refuse to think more deeply about that and think about other reasons about it. Same thing with these other different disciplines that lead them to believe that there is no God. And kind of a corollary to that, they look at the evidence from the one side, but they don't look at the evidence from the other side. You're willing to look at the problem of evil and not consider why God might allow that to happen, without looking at some of the other things that God may have done, like creation and the universe, right? Human beings and the complexity of the body, things like that. History itself, especially history of the Jews, when we look at the Jewish nation, how do they exist? How are they there? Prophecy and archaeology that all point back to this biblical text and verify verify it. I had another word there, but it didn't come to me. Jesus himself, persecution of the church, the great saints and all the benefactors, the great things that they did for the world, who all believed in God and were spurred on to do it as a result of that. These are things that people who just deny God won't look at the other side of the evidence, is what he's saying there. And response 3, they don't hesitate to risk their eternal life on something they can't prove. Again, we get back to that Pascal's wager idea here. A man risking his fortune on the roll of a dice and losing is a fool. And the idea there is you can't prove that there isn't life after death, so why would you wager your eternity on that? And that's the response back with the third response back to those things that he brings up in this chapter. And of course, if you want to deny any of that, don't deny Mr. T, right? I pity the fool who says there's no heart. There you go. Anyway, good fun for that. All right, chapter 2. Chapter 2 he entitles Dead Religion. He uses Psalm 50, and one particular verse he points to is, "These things you have done, and I have been silent. You thought that I was one like yourself. But now I rebuke you and lay the charge before you." So the last one was our question of our relationship with God. This one's a question of our attitude towards God. In chapter 1, the fool who doesn't believe, and he lives his life that way as if he doesn't believe in God, at least he's living a consistent life. He's true to himself. He's not being hypocritical. In chapter 2, this person, they know there's a God, but they're still choosing to live life on their own. The fact that there is a God has no influence on their life. They're hypocritical. It's a self-contradictory life. And he uses Psalm 50 to illustrate this as we go. And he breaks it down like this. In verses 1 through 6, we have an accusation by God. He calls the people to judgment, and he is the righteous judge. The charge to them is they misunderstand and misuse the sacrifices, bringing them in the wrong way. Second, that next section, 16 through 22, the evidence is he shows that they misuse the law and the covenants. And his conclusion and appeal at the end is you need to give thanksgiving to God and live rightly as a result of that. What makes this worse than the fool who doesn't go to church is we've got people in the church who live like this. They will acknowledge there's a God, but then live their own life. And don't we see that in some of Jesus's statements in the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 7, verse 21 and 22, when those people at the end of the day will say, "Lord, Lord," they're thinking, "Hey, we're